Hello there my friends, welcome to my another video. Today we are building this brand new BT-7 from Flyhawk in 1/72 scale. Now Flyhawk is one of my all-time favorite companies, they make quite amazing models, so I am quite excited to work on this one. Let's get right into building. The assembly starts very straightforward, it's just building big plates of plastic together. Weirdly enough, this kit is molded in dark green plastic, which is not unusual for other companies, but for Flyhawk it is quite rare because all the other Flyhawk kits that I've built, as far as I'm aware, used grey plastic, so I'm quite curious as to why this is. For gluing all the bits together, of course, I use Tamiya Extra Thin Cement, the slow drying one. This allows me to create quick bonds between plastic parts really easily and quickly without any hassle. As expected of Flyhawk, the parts go together quite nicely, as with most of their models. There is a little bit of gappage, but that is also something that I've come to expect from Flyhawk. The parts don't fit together 100%, but that's okay. It's not that big of a deal. The assembly in general, there's not much I can talk about. I'm not gonna texture this model or anything like that, as it's a riveted tank. It always feels really good to build a model with a simple suspension. Like here you have the Christie suspension, which is just a few wheels instead of quadrillion wheels like on a Tiger. As always, I create a whole track sub-assembly for ease of painting. I start doing this by gluing all the single links around the sprocket and the idler. Then I connect the sprocket with the first wheel, and then I start wrapping around all the remaining tracks, starting with the longest link at the bottom, and this way I can create a simple sub-assembly that will let me take it off and paint it easier than if I had to paint each individual wheel by itself. Of course, if that's something you wanna do, you obviously can, but I prefer it this way. As other Flyhawk kits, this one also includes some basic photo edge that can improve your model quite drastically. It's not the hardest to bend, but you do have an option of not using at least this one that is for the vents at the front. The big vent then has a photo edge that you sort of need to use, otherwise it would end up just being completely empty. As you can see, it is bendable with just tweezers, but I bet a bending jig would probably be a little easier to work with. I managed to do it, so you can probably too. This then gets glued, of course, with super glue, which is really annoying and gets everywhere and gets your fingers sticky, and then they stick together, and then they stick to model, and then they leave print marks, and then it ends in a disaster. I love footage. You get a metal barrel included in this kit as well, and the turret is assembled in such a way that it's actually movable, which I appreciate, because I hate when it like hints that it should be movable and then it's too loose. That's really disappointing, because I like moving my barrels in case I want to use them in the diorama, the tank, which I didn't here, but just in case, you know, it's always useful. Unfortunately, for some reason, the barrel isn't made in such a way that it feels intentional. Instead of having a hole to go into like all the other kits that I've built from them, this one you have to cut the original plastic barrel in half and then just glue this onto it, which means you have to cut precisely, which is really hard to do. Also, the metal barrel has a pin on the back, which sorta implies that there should be a hole, but there isn't, so you would either have to drill the hole or you have to remove the pin. And removing the pin is easier, but also it creates not perfectly flat area, so it gets glued on an angle, and then you start struggling, and then you get really sad. Yeah, I love included metal barrels, but I wish they were a little more intentional and didn't feel like a complete afterthought. One thing that I do appreciate is an inclusion of a, I think it's a metal chain for the model, which is really cool because it allows you to do some really cool stuff on the model. It was actually too long, so I cut it up into smaller pieces. I used some on the front, as is intentional, and then I used some here on this spare log that I decided to add. I think it adds a little more interest to have the log being attached with the chain. This is a really cool inclusion. Overall, the kit I would rate like 8.5 out of 10. Definitely recommend, not really for beginners, but also if you're a beginner and you want a BT-7, you'll be better off with this one than the ones, because those are disastrously bad. But yeah, it's not the simplest, it's really fiddly, but that's to be expected of a 72nd scale kit that isn't done by Hobby Boss. Speaking of which, I have a model from them, I should make it. Anyway, with the assembly done, we can now get into the painting stage. The painting, of course, starts with the normal priming stage that I do on every model that I have. This is a Vallejo Mecha Black Primer. I make sure that I cover the entire model with this paint, which will unify all the colors of the model, and therefore the colors that go on them won't have different shades, because footage, for example, is harder to paint over because it's bright and yellow and metallic, and I overthin my paints. So this way I can have everything in one paint, and I know that once I add the layer of actual paint, it'll be the same shade. And also, the primer is a little rough, which means it allows the paint to adhere a little better. Now, the main color. From what you've probably maybe seen in my previous videos, if you haven't, go check them out, you know that I really enjoy pole shading on my models. And I've been doing this for a long time to create a nice three-dimensional effect, to make the model look a little brighter than it actually is, because here in 72nd scale it is quite important to do this, because otherwise the model will just look way too dark due to its size and the fact that it reflects way less light into your eye than a bigger scale model. And well, I talked about it with my friend, who is a huge inspiration for my models because he makes amazing work. I sent him the 38T from the last video. He said it looks pretty good, but the contrast is still not quite there. It still needs a little more contrast in the shadows especially, because I've been kind of underdoing the washes in a way. And that's why you can see me here actually painting the model with a darker green than the base coat, because from previous videos, if you've noticed, I started the paint job with the base color of the vehicle, then I just lightened it. Here I am actually making a darker paint, and then I am lighting it up to the base coat, and then the base coat is even getting lighter. And then I will do one thing that Heresy Brush does on Instagram, if you've seen their posts. They make amazing 1:100 scale models, and they highlight a lot of stuff, and I just love how just alive their models look, and their models are really my huge inspiration, so that's what I've been trying to do here. You can see that the base coat color that I then mixed up to be just the general color of the vehicle does cover basically most of this darker green. However, I try my best to keep it in the shadows to create that darkened look, and I do try to spray in the middle of panels, but you know, the highlights later on will even more highlight the whole thing. This technique does involve a lot of learning and trial and error, and I do feel like I'm not still like taught how to do this properly, but I think I'm getting better slowly but surely. I must say I was really happy with the paint job that I managed to get here, and it's definitely gonna be my reference moving forward. The final layer is almost completely buff because that's the color that I've been using for lightening. And I know it looks really light right now on this video, but trust me, after all of the weathering effects and everything, it'll get toned down so much, it'll be almost impossible to see. However, it'll still keep the model nice and light and it won't look too dark for the scale. The detail painting stage on the model didn't take particularly long because there isn't much stuff on the hull. I simply used dark brown acrylic color to paint all of the wooden things like the log and the tool handles, and then I used red brown to paint all of the rusty areas like the chains, for example, or the exhausts. To give the wood a wooden texture, I painted on a lot of tiny lines combined from deck 10 and buff just to make it look a little more wooden. This is my favorite technique for wooden bits. The rubber on the wheels was painted with black, the tracks were painted with red brown as well, same old same old. I decided to paint a little name Szczur onto the side. This is sort of a reference to War Thunder because Szczur means red in Ukrainian, and BT-7 is considered a red tank in the game, so I just named it that as a sort of nod that probably no one will get, and so far I only got a critique that Szczur isn't in Russian. Once everything was painted and varnished with a flat varnish from VMS, I started adding the wash to the model. Now, the wash is a really interesting contraption. It is used to create a shadow or sort of a outline of all the detail present on the model, and therefore you could say it's a sort of opposite of a post shading, because while post shading is supposed to make stuff lighter, the wash creates the deepest, darkest parts on the model, and this way you can create a really nice contrasty effect which will show all of the details really nicely. I'm using AK dark brown wash for green vehicles here. You can use any wash for any vehicle, the name doesn't really make it illegal to use it anywhere else, but this is the darkest wash that I have, and therefore I like it the most because it creates the highest contrast. To push the contrast even further, once the wash is dry, I start highlighting edges and tiny details using a really light color, green in this case. Usually I would do this right after post shading and make it part of post shading, but this way the wash also darkens this, and since it's such a small model and I don't have enough skill to clean the wash up properly, I find it better to paint it once after the wash is dry. You can tell me what you think, but it achieved exactly the effect I wanted. Since this is a Russian tank, I couldn't help but add a lot of chipping to the vehicle. I used ordinary red brown again for this because I just really like the paint to represent rust. Made sure to not overdo the chips because I want them to be in scale. However, I didn't make it rustier than I usually do because I've noticed that too fine chipping is almost impossible to see in real life. On video it's nicely visible, but in real life on a model show or something like that, hard to see, so I am trying to make a model that looks good from all viewing perspectives. To tie the chips to the model, I used a streaking rust enamel wash from AK again. This will just create a nice sort of faded rusty thingy around the chip, it'll make it look a little more in line with the rest of the model. Since it's a enamel wash, I used enamel thinner to blend it all together. And with this completed, it was basically simply time to start weathering the model. To add the muddy texture to the vehicle, I used Fig Mud from Vallejo. This is a acrylic sort of paste that looks really like mud, because I got it all over my clothes once accidentally, and it just completely looks like I fell into mud. So that's really cool. Since it's acrylic, you can blend it with water, which I prefer quite a lot. Here you can see me, I'm trying to get the mud into corners where I would expect the mud to sort of accumulate, but since it creates this harsh contrast between it and the hull, I use water to blend it together, so there is no like really sudden change on the surface, because I think blended it looks way better. Since it's acrylic, it really doesn't take long to dry. Once it does, I can start the pre-dusting. I've been trying to learn how to use enamels for weathering and stuff like that, and they do look pretty good and work really well. For some reason I somehow still find myself back at using ordinary acrylic colors that I used for painting the model, also being used for the weathering effects. I don't know, for me the quick sort of drying time is very preferred, even though for blending people more prefer the enamels since they take way longer to dry, but for me, since I want my models to be quick and simple, it's just easier to do it with acrylics. Now, this is usually done with acrylics regardless, or you could use enamel paints because it's sprayed from a paintbrush, but now we can move on to the normal weathering effects with a paintbrush. And here you can see me adding additional paint to create more color variety on the vehicle. I mixed almost a black mud just so I can create a huge contrast and add really wet mud to the model. I started adding it around the biggest corners on the bottom and on the top. This was then blended with ordinary water, which is something that I simply prefer over the enamels. And so the change between the two isn't that harsh. I also added some lighter mud in between the dusty and the heavy muddy areas to create a sort of a nice transition. This was also again blended with water to create a nice blended and soft look. Repeating all of the techniques on the tracks was pretty simple. I just made sure to concentrate the muddy effects toward middle of the wheels, because that's where the mud would probably end. And just to tie everything together, I started speckling the model completely to create some visual texture that's nice to look at, and to sort of indicate that the tracks move, they throw the mud around, and then it gets everywhere. All that's left to do on the model now is some finishing touches, specifically stuff like silvering on the tracks and on the metal wheels that would happen from the tracks rubbing against, just metal against metal. And with all that painted on, the model is basically done and we can go on to the glamour shots. Well, another model is now finished, and I must say I'm really happy with it. I say this all the time now that I think about it, but yeah, I think this is a pretty good project. Of course, that's just me patting myself on the back, and that's kind of selfish, so I'm gonna leave the judgment up to you, of course, but Yeah, I would love to know what you think down in the comments, and of course, thank you all for watching this video, because without you I wouldn't really have a reason to do this. Of course, I still don't really earn money from this or anything like that, but that's not why I do this. I do this because I wanna share my models with you, and I'm really happy that there are already people that recognize my work and they enjoy it, they find it helpful, and write me kind comments or talk about with me or about me. So yeah, I really want to thank you all for that. I really appreciate it. Anyway, that's gonna be it for today's video. Again, I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please consider going over to my Patreon, where I post almost daily, or well, as fast as I can, about my upcoming projects, and I will also maybe share some 3D models there. If you don't wanna support me that way, you can always give me a subscribe or a like and share this video with other people that you think might enjoy my work. So, again, thank you all for watching, and I will see you